Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Veda's second webinar in our fall series on soil health and regenerative farming practices. If you missed our first one with Dr. Bradford talking about cover crops, feel free to go back on any of our social media platforms, and you can find a link to that. And really good discussion on cover crops and different elements that you need to think about as you're implementing cover crops into your operation. So be sure and go back and check that out if you hadn't already. But my name is Danny Blaylock. I'm the Chief Farm Operations Officer here at Veda. I've been here around 3 years. Live here in Jonesboro, Arkansas. With Veda, we operate two direct farming operations. We've got one in Clarksdale, Mississippi, that's a little over 2,600 acres, and another here in Newport, Arkansas. We focus on, growing crops that are grown here in the Mississippi Delta. So we grow cotton, corn, soybeans with a little bit of rice in Mississippi and a lot of rice and some soybeans here in Arkansas. And we do that to really prove out these regenerative practices. We actually call them our proving ground farms because we want to test this on our own farms before we take it to farmers and have them implement it. The best way to introduce you to Veda, I think, is with our mission statement. Our mission statements to perfect and promote regenerative farming systems that propel farm profitability and resilience at scale. And that last piece is really, really important. And we'll talk to some of this today in our topic as well. But the fact that they can go hand in hand, both profitability and soil health, you can increase both at the same time. There's a lot of thoughts out there that they're antagonistic of each other, that they're absolutely not if done the right way. And we'll talk a little bit of that today as we get into some soil health discussions. With us today is Dr. Andrew McGowan. I've known Dr. McGowan for a couple years now. He does a great job here with us. And Andrew, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. I'm the Senior Agronomy Manager here at Veda. My background is originally in agronomy and soil microbiology. Did my PhD at Kansas State University. At Veda, I spend a lot of my time managing the research trial program that we have on the 5,000 plus acres of farmland that we have in the Delta, testing out different strategies for transitioning to regenerative ag, and also trying to take measurements to quantify some of the outcomes of the practices that we're trying out. So excited to be here with you all today.
Good deal, Andrew. We'll jump right in. This first topic is one around soil wealth. So we'd love to get your input here, Andrew. And we had discussions leading up to this around not only people think of soil health as what you add and you build, but it's also how do you take advantage of what you already have and you're just not, and you make sure you're not losing that. Is just as important as what you put into it and what you build. So let's start with this first one. And Andrew, tell us a little bit, what do you think about soil wealth?
Yeah, I think the main idea here is that when we're farming, it's kind of easy to focus on the pressures that we see on farm profitability that are on the surface in front of us, and oftentimes that we don't have control over. So declining commodity prices, increasing input costs, those are all things that are forefront of mind and that, we're definitely feeling the pain from on our farms at Veda as well. But it's important not to lose sight below the surface that our soils and soil health can really provide a lot of value to our operation. And historically, there's been a lot of soil degradation, so that the value that your soils can bring, might actually be adding a lot to your costs of production. Those are things that we can control. And so the main idea with soil wealth is to make sure that we're tuned in to the costs and benefits that we can have from trying to build up our soil health.
So Andrew, that's great. And I know you talk about soil degradation, and a key element to that is erosion, one of the key elements. So, a lot of folks, when we talk about erosion, your thoughts don't normally go to the Delta or the Mid-South. You normally think of, the Midwest, where, practices have been implemented for decades now to help with soil erosion. You look at the Dust Bowl in Kansas and different areas where erosion is prevalent. But, talk a little bit about how erosion affects the Mississippi Delta, and how we farm here.
Yeah, that's right. I think it's not always an issue that's forefront of mind, because the delta is so flat, and we know that slope is one of the factors that is important for erosion. But it's important to keep in mind there are other factors that can drive erosion that do come into play in the delta. We know that we have poorly drained soils that make it hard for water to infiltrate, and that can lead to runoff issues. Another big one is rainfall intensity. On average, a rainfall intensity in the Delta is about 1.5 to 3 times what it is in the Midwest. I think some of us are feeling that acutely after Hurricane Francine. That system dumped a lot of rain in a short period of time on our farms. When you have those intense rainfall events, that can lead to pretty significant erosion. On average, the USDA estimates that in the Delta, we're losing 4,000 to 8,000 pounds per acre of topsoil per year from water erosion. To put that into context, if you have a 60 bushel per acre field of soybeans, that means that you're paying 67 to 133 pounds of topsoil per bushel per year, which is a cost I think that a lot of farmers don't really think about when they're growing crops, but it's important to keep in mind. Um, that rate of soil erosion in the Delta is technically below what the USDA considers to be a tolerable rate of soil loss. But it's important to keep in mind when that soil is eroding, that's your topsoil. So that's the part of your soil that has the most nutrients, the highest organic matter, and the best soil structure. So you're really losing the best of what you have when that washes away. And at the end of the day, that means that you're probably going to be needing to offset that by increasing fertilizer applications. You're losing water holding capacity, and you're going to have poor habitat for root growth. So it's something that's really important to keep control on, and especially as if one of your goals is to try to build up your soil health. If you have these rates of erosion happening in the background, you're really going to make your job of building up your soil a lot harder.
Yeah, and it's a key point, Andrew. I mean, I think, as you look at just the rising cost of inputs, it is something that farmers are dealing with, throughout the US today. But, as we go into winter now, and in fall, you start seeing more and more rains. We saw, the hurricane come through, or the tropical storm come through over the last week, that dumped a lot of rain on us here in Arkansas and Mississippi. And lots of pictures were posted on social media, and some were comparing clear water running off fields versus water running off that was just muddy. And that's you've got to look at that as that's your profit running off. To your point, that's where these high cost inputs that you're putting in are all going to be in that top few inches, and that's what's running in the ditches. So it's definitely something that we need to be thinking about, and can improve. So as we'll shift a little bit here, let's go from looking at erosion. Let's talk a little bit about compaction, Andrew. And I saw last week somebody had posted a picture of, I think it was a Model D John Deere, that was bumper to bumper with an 8400 John Deere tractor, and just the sheer size. And it's something that everybody's seen evolve, but the sheer size of farm equipment today is incredible, compared to what it was, a generation, 2 generations ago. And so, as we talk about compaction, I think it's key to understand it's not that farmers have done anything wrong. It's just the evolution of farming practices over the years, and what it's done to our soils. So talk a little bit about, how does compaction affect our productivity on the farm, Andrew?
Yeah, I think this is a really important topic, especially in the Delta, is the in addition to having the heavier equipment, high clay soils and poor drainage mean that a lot of times we have really wet conditions at the time of year when we need to get a lot of field work done. And that moisture kind of acts as a lubricant that really helps pack those soil particles more tightly together and create really severe compaction. Um, when we're thinking about impacts of compaction, at the end of the day, it really comes down to reduced volume, soil volume for your roots to explore for nutrients and water. So when you have a healthy soil, as the crop grows, those roots can follow the available water and nutrients down into the soil profile and could easily grow beyond 4 feet deep into the soil as they need to make sure that they're getting the water and the nutrients they need. If we add a compacted layer at like 5 to 8 inches, then that pretty much sets a cap on how far down in the soil your roots are able to explore. So they can only utilize what's in that top 5 to 8 inches of soil. And so there's a lot of nutrients and a lot of water that's stored up in your soil that they won't be able to access. I think the water can be especially important when you get later into the growing season as things heat up. Your crop's water use requirement is increasing. It's also hotter. There's more evaporation happening at the soil surface. So we know that those top few inches is what's going to dry out first. If the roots can't go any deeper than that, you're going to have to offset that with more frequent irrigation. And of course, there's a cost associated with that. So in the end, a compacted soil can end up costing you quite a bit when you're trying to increase irrigation. You might need to apply more nutrients as well to make sure the roots get what they need in those top few inches of soil. But even if you try to compensate with increased inputs, you're probably going to be looking at yield drag in these areas that have serious compaction. And this next slide has a couple examples of that. Purdue did a nice study where they were measuring yield and crop growth in a compacted versus uncompacted soil with corn. They found that stand counts in the compacted soil were reduced by 20 to 30%. And at the end of the season, they found that there is a 30 bushel per acre yield hit in the compacted soil versus the healthy one. So that would have been about $120 per acre loss due to that soil compaction. Another example you can see in the two figures at the bottom of this slide, on the left is an example of a compaction map. So it's mapping the penetrometer resistance at a 6-inch soil depth. And then on the right is a yield map for the same field. So these compaction maps are something that we like to do on our farm and also our customers' fields at Veda because we know compaction is so important. You can see in this example, those light green and yellow areas of the map are where we're seeing compaction that's significant enough that it's likely to affect root growth. And then if you look at the yield map, you can see those same areas do have more red and yellow indicating spots with lower yield. So I think this highlights that measuring for compaction can be really important to understand if you have a problem, and also that this might not be something that's occurring over your entire field. There may be pockets hidden within your field where you're experiencing serious yield drag, but you won't necessarily notice unless you take a closer look.
Yeah, and Andrew, it's a key point, and that's one of the reasons that compaction and measuring compaction on farms is a key part of our Soil Plus program, and we'll chat about that a little bit later. But as you start transitioning a farm from conventional tillage, let's say, to minimal till operation, finding these areas early on and getting these areas up to par with the rest of the field are key. That way, you're starting from scratch and you're comparing the same field to the same field. So, that's something we talk with a lot of growers about throughout Arkansas and Mississippi. and we've really seen a lot of attention and excitement around the compaction. And some farmers are shocked at some of the metrics that we roll out and show around compaction on their farms, and its ability is to unlock once you resolve some of those issues. So definitely a key piece there. Let's switch gears again, Andrew, and talk a little bit about, something that a lot of people don't think about offhand with soil health. But talk to me about soil health and how it can affect irrigation. And that's something we've seen on our farm in particular. But we'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so when we're thinking about soil health and water use, in my mind, it really comes down to uh, trying to make sure that the rainfall that's coming down into your field stays in the field so that it's available for the crop to use later in the season, when it really is going to need a lot of water. On some of the previous slides on compaction and erosion, a lot of those are issues that occur when water is kind of working against you instead of for you, and a lot of that can happen when you have poor soil health and poor soil structure, so that the water can't enter the soil and it's either sitting on the surface or running off and taking soil and nutrients with it. In the context of soil health and water utilization, soil texture is really one of the key components here, and looking for ways to build up your soil texture, soil structure, and improve the soil water holding capacity. And a visual that shows differences in soil structure between unhealthy soil and a healthy soil is shown in the figure on the right, where you have a soil from an unhealthy field in the water column on the left, and one from a healthy soil on the right. This is a slate test where you add a soil clod into the water, and you can see in the unhealthy soil that that clod is completely dispersed and so we end up with a bunch of muddy water in the column, whereas that clod on the right from the healthy soil has really retained its structure. And this is just a visual illustration of similar processes that are happening when it rains or you're irrigating in the field and that soil gets wet. That water can have a tendency to cause soil particles to disperse and can break down the soil structure in an unhealthy soil that doesn't have strong aggregate stability. And that can translate into problems like crusting. You also reduce the amount of pore space in the soil, so you have lower water holding capacity. And that all translates into less rainfall working into your soil and getting stored there so that your crop can use it later in the season. And the way that you would need to compensate for that is with increased irrigation, which of course, has a cost associated with it. On our farm, a 3-acre irrigation event would cost about $775. So you can see as you start adding those additional events, that could really add up. Anecdotally, on our farm in Mississippi, we've seen after a few years with cover cropping and reducing tillage that we're able to start irrigating about one event later than a lot of our neighbors, because we're carrying over more of that spring moisture into the growing season, which can help reduce costs.
Yeah, and Andrew, that's a good one, and I think we saw that in a couple of ways this spring. One was, as we got some heavy rains in Mississippi, what we saw in our fields was the ability to absorb a lot of that water, versus some fields around us that were holding water in the middles for a long time. So the ability for again to take up that water versus watching it run off in the ditches were huge. The other aspect of that that you just touched on there was, the ability for us, and it was very evident this spring, that we could wait 5 days or more, where farms around us that were planted at the same time our fields were, where they were turning the water on. We had moisture probes in, we were monitoring everything. Um, and we could actually wait. And then we caught some rains, which allowed us to cut out, at least one irrigation, if not more. So, yeah, I mean, this is a key point that a lot of people don't think about when they think of soil health, but it's probably one of the most evident on our farms that just jumps off the page to you versus the soil sampling and measurements that often lag a little bit year over year. But to see that, I mean, it was incredible this year on the Mississippi farm. You can really tell the steps that were taken the last 3 years. So it was good to see that. Um, so we talked about, how soil health affects the irrigation cost. Andrew, talk a little bit, how does it affect the rest of input cost for a farmer?
Yeah. So especially if we're thinking about nutrients and fertilizer inputs, soil health really comes into play in a number of different ways. Um, but they all kind of boil down to when you have poor soil health, you're going to have higher losses of nutrients, and that equates to a need for higher fertilizer spend. So, one key area uh, where you can have increased costs with poor soil health is with your organic matter. Um, so, historically, we've lost a lot of organic matter from our soils through the history of farming from intensive tillage. It's estimated that on average, our soils have lost about 30% of the organic matter that they had compared to when they were undisturbed prior to farming. So in the Delta, if you think about how much organic matter that those soils have now, um, this means that we would have the and also if you think about the organic matter, 1% is assumed to have about 20 to 30 pounds of N per acre that it's providing to the crop each growing season. So the amount of organic matter we would have lost in the Delta, that's about 20 to 60 pounds per acre of nitrogen that we would have in addition to what we have now from that lost organic matter. So this is something that's already happened. We can't do anything about that. The organic matter is gone already, but I think it highlights if you try to build up your soil health and move things in the other direction, how much money could be on the table from trying to get your organic matter moving in the direction towards, what it might have originally been at. Runoff is another key area where soil health comes into play. We've talked about erosion and irrigation impacts already, but another area that poor drainage comes into play is with carrying nutrients off of your field. It's estimated that about 2 to 5% of nitrogen and phosphorus fertilizer applied in the Delta is lost into the Mississippi River in the Gulf of Mexico. So that's literally, some of your investment that's, washing away and, contributing to an environmental problem rather than, helping your crops grow and increase yield. 2 to 5% might not necessarily sound like a lot, but it's also important to keep in mind, like this year where we had heavy rainfall events last week, you can have acute losses that can really add up. They might not happen every year, but in a case where maybe you've put down your fall phosphorus application already, if it didn't get incorporated and you have a big rainfall event like that on an unhealthy soil that's not able to take up much of that moisture, you could really lose a lot of that fertilizer. Again, that's not something that would necessarily happen every year, but it's a risk, and improving the health of your soil, can help mitigate some of those risks that we're going to be seeing as we do have more intense weather events. Another key area where soil health can impact nutrient losses is with denitrification. And again, this is related to the drainage issues we see in the Delta, but when it's wet and that water can't get in the soil, you have ponding on the surface, you can lose a lot of nitrogen from denitrification pretty quickly. On average, you can lose like 2 to 5% of nitrogen per day that you have ponded conditions, depending on the soil temperature. So in an example where you have about 240 pounds of nitrogen per acre that you've applied at UAN as UAN, if that sits in the soil for 3 weeks after you apply, about 145 pounds of that would have been converted into nitrate. If you have an extended ponding event that happens then, um, where you have ponding for 14 days, you would lose about 70 pounds per acre of nitrogen over that period of time. So almost a third of the total land applied, just to illustrate how significant those losses could be.
Yeah, and Andrew, the element I would add here too as well is, I think um, when we see nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium in the soil, if it's not available for plant uptake, if it's locked up for whatever reason in the soil, then I think it is more prone to runoff or denitrification with a lot of things that you've mentioned here. So that's the other aspect I think with soil health that it helps, and that's why we do things and we do soil sampling with the Haney test as well, is to understand not only what a basic soil sample would give us, but also, how much have we got in the soil that may be locked up and how can we break some of that free over time and make it where it can be taken up by the plant. So, no, very key points there, Andrew. And so now we've talked to, a few issues, a few concerns. Talk to us a little bit, Andrew. Now what can we do? What's some resolution to some of these items?
Yeah, so at this point, it should be clear that soil health is related to a lot of critical functions in the soil. And some of the issues we've talked about, erosion, compaction, nutrient loss, those are caused when we have, in part, when we have poor soil health, and those functions that we need from the soil are reduced. So a key component to addressing a lot of those issues is looking for ways to improve your soil health. And hopefully we've illustrated that there's potentially a lot of money on the table by addressing those issues and trying to build up your soil. Um, at Veda, like some of the strategies we really like to use to try to build up soil health are things like planting cover crops, testing for compaction, trying to understand where it is an issue, maybe addressing it with deep tillage in certain cases if it's necessary. You can use deep-rooted cover crops like tillage radish to help break up those compacted layers. Um, Cover crops, especially ones that produce a lot of biomass, like cereal rye, can really help cover your soil and protect it from rainfall impact and runoff from erosion. Help build up your organic matter so you can increase your water holding capacity, improve soil structure. And then, of course, they can also help build up your soil biology, like you were saying earlier, Danny, which can help increase nutrient availability and nutrient use efficiency. I think biologicals are another area where we look for opportunities for trying to jumpstart some of the soil's capacity for nutrient availability and nutrient cycling. So, that's just touching on a few of the strategies that we like at a high level. I think we could talk about those a lot more, hopefully in some future webinars.
Yeah, Andrew, that's great. So I know we're coming up on time. Want to thank everybody for being in this morning. For those that are watching live, as well as those that are watching after the fact, we appreciate you taking time to watch our webinars and interest in Veda. If you have questions about the topics we discussed this morning or just anything around regenerative agriculture, feel free to reach out to us. I know we've had a few questions come in as we've been talking this morning, but we just don't have time to answer them live. So we'll absolutely get back to you on those, and you can send those to ask@veda.com, and then we'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. Also, one of the things that separates Veda out and that I'm very, very proud of is our boots on the ground team. We've got guys in both Arkansas and Mississippi that would love to chat with you in person. They would love to come to your farm, look at your operation. And so, to take advantage of that, go to www.veda.com/ask. And then finally, we've got, like most everybody today, we're on all the social media platforms. So, feel free to follow us there. You can see our progress as we go through the harvest on both of our farms, as well as see, upcoming webinars and things that are coming down the pipe. We're on tap to do one of these roughly every couple weeks, every 3 weeks throughout the fall. So, something we're really excited about, and would love to see you on future episodes. So, with that, thank you again to Dr. Andrew McGowan for his time this morning. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thanks, everyone.